All right. Good morning, Erica. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you, Cal?
I'm good. So I just want to start by telling everybody we are a readiness group. I am Dr. Kelly Guidry, and I'll let Miss Erica introduce herself.
And I am Dr. Erica Lee, a physical therapist. So not quite in the mental health world, but live vicariously through all my mental health friends.
It's an awesome combination, though, because especially what we're talking about today. And I think that how those two things relate is just so important. And so, anyway, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
So we are talking today about chronic stress. So let's just jump in with what do we mean when we're saying chronic stress?
So we talk a lot about in the resiliency and first responder world about the difference between critical stress and chronic stress, because all of us face both of these. And of course, in the first responder world, they face critical stress quite often. And in the past, a lot of what the focus has been in organizations has been focusing on the critical stress and how you help people through that. And we have failed in a lot of ways to help people learn how to address their chronic stress so that they can come to any critical stress that they might face in their life with a clear plate, is what we call it, because all the stuff we go through in life tends to stack, right? And when you have a lot of chronic stress on your plate, and maybe even some unprocessed critical stress from your past, it just keeps building and building and building. And then when you do come to that critical moment, you're coming to it with a lot already there, and it makes it a lot harder for you to grow from it on the other side versus living in it, because you've got so much that you just can't get it all where it needs to go. So the chronic stress component is all those things that we deal with on a daily basis. Some of it's professional, a lot of it is much more personal in our personal lives. And so it's everything from finances to marriage to lack of sleep to some people will say Common Core math to just the things that we deal with on a daily basis, right? And so learning how to manage that stuff in a way that keeps that as low as possible is obviously going to help with resiliency. But there's some good strategies and ways to do that can make it more powerful for you on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we don't always take inventory of what our chronic stress looks like. So we might know that finances are stressful right now, or we might know that the boss and the project I have going on at work is stressful, but we're still having to be mom, and we're still having to be, a spouse, and we're still having to do all those other things, not realizing that maybe our plate is really full. And so one thing that I think is helpful is being able to do something like taking an inventory of what is on my plate, what is my chronic stress.
Yes.
Do you have strategies for how you talk to people about that?
Yes, we have. There's different ways, because there's, chronic stress is kind of one of those things where it's like, it's everything, right? There's mental and emotional stress. There's productivity stress, right? There's family stress. It's a lot of different buckets that we're looking at here. And so you kind of need to look at which area is stressing you out the most, right? And so we often talk about what's the worst part. What's the biggest thing? What's the thing that's really weighing on you? And start there. And really determine what it is that is kind of getting in your way, so that you can come up with a plan for that one thing to put it back up in the air, so you feel like you have some sense of control, right? And so that can be, for some people, it's something situational that they're going through. For some people, for a lot of people, it's finances, right? And so for some people, it's relationships, right? Those marriage issues that we all struggle with, or parenting relationships that you're going through, or some people have elderly parents that they're trying to help and take care of and care for. Whatever it might be, taking inventory often starts with just identify that one thing that's weighing on you the most, and come up with a plan for that one thing, right? It sounds simple, but often we try to manage everything that's coming in all at once. And so then we feel like we have no control over any of it. if we can identify that one thing and come up with habit patterns or a plan to minimize the impact of that stress in our lives, then it frees us up. It frees up our brain to then kind of look at everything else and go, okay, now I can start working on the rest of these things so that I, minimize that stress as much as possible.
Yeah, and I like that concept of let's develop a plan. And I think that sounds simple, but in reality, I think we tend to make it way more complex than it needs to be. And so I just want to point out that when we say, hey, have a plan, it's like, okay, if it's my finances and I'm going to try to get a plan around that, it doesn't mean I'm overhauling everything about my finances. It means I'm identifying, okay, the biggest stressor I have is making sure that I have enough money in the bank when the first of the month comes around, or whatever that might be. Yeah. And then you develop a habit that's really specific to that. And that's one way to start to mitigate some of that chronic stress.
Yeah. And depending on the situation, sometimes it's habits, and finding a good routine that allows you to address some of these more chronic ongoing stressors on a daily basis, because there's things we have to manage. And honestly, we have to manage them so that they don't become critical, right? Like when we're looking at finances, you've got to have some method of managing your finances. Otherwise, you end up in a critical situation where your house is being foreclosed on, or you're having to declare bankruptcy, or whatever the case might be. For marriage, your relationship, if you don't have good habits in place for your relationship, and it does take that presence to establish those habits, to maintain the intimacy with your partner, then you end up in a place where you're looking down the road of divorce or just pure unhappiness in a critical component because you just haven't focused on those things. Same thing with kids, right? Like if we don't, if we're not present for our children and we don't establish relationships with our children, then you end up with them in high school, you're disconnected with them, they start making bad choices, you end up in a critical situation where maybe they've ended up with whatever it can be, DUIs, suicidal ideation, drug addiction, whatever it might be, because we haven't taken the time to put those healthy habits in place in those areas to prevent them from becoming critical stress down the road.
Yeah, so we're talking, the first is take an inventory, right? Identify kind of that thing that is your biggest barrier right now, and then come up with a plan, and that plan really being around new habit formation and what that could do to kind of help alleviate some of that one maybe area of your life.
Yeah.
What else do you do to mitigate chronic stress?
Well, along with that plan, I think there's a research component to it to find your strategy that works for you. Like some people may think Dave Ramsey is the end all be all for finances, and he might not work at all for somebody else, right? Marriage, it may be, a scheduled date night, which other people, they want more spontaneity. They don't want to schedule it, right? So whatever it is that's your biggest stressor in the moment, coming up with that plan may take some research and some testing to figure out what's going to work for you in that area. Once you get that plan and you implement it and you start to see a sense of control there, then the next step would be to look at the other areas of your life that have chronic stress and to implement a routine to help mitigate those. So kind of do that inventory, come up with that one big stressor, find a plan to help decrease the impact of that stressor, and then look at your routines during the day and figure out a way to address some of the other chronic stress in your life to reduce that during the day and also to prevent it from becoming critical down the road. And again, everybody's routine is going to be specific to them, right? And so you've got to figure out what works for you. There's a lot of good ways to look at that. There's a lot of productivity experts out there that can give you advice on how to increase your productivity. And I think the bottom line of productivity is a lot to do with managing the chronic stress in your life. There's one called I think it's Craig Ballantyne, Ballantyne. He's got a great method out there for finding 2-hour chunks in your day to help you manage some of the, all the things we have to do, but making sure you keep that chronic stress low. So that's a good thing to look into.
Yeah, I like that. So what I'm hearing too, and what I think is important to kind of say is that once you start with one area of your life and you can start to really feel that sense of control back and maybe feel like you're making progress in that area, it's much easier than to start another.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like a snowball effect. And I think that's really important to say because a lot of times when we kind of live in an immediate society, we want things, we want it now. And this does take time. So it's kind of something you got to put a lot of effort into.
Yes.
And once you do, though, and you start to see that progress and that snowball effect, it becomes a lot easier to then start looking at other areas and implementing plans because now I have a system. I have a process that I know works. So I can take that and then apply it to other parts of my life.
100%. Yeah. And it's a journey, I mean, Lord knows I have redone my productivity routine 9 million times trying to find a better way to make it work for myself. And it's a journey and we go through phases in our life where we're much more and much less. And it's just kind of the way things go. But adding in the component of habits. There's a great book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. If anybody wants to read that, it's all about the power of habit and small changes, not overhauling our lives because none of us can do that, but small changes that make a big difference long term. And then the next thing I would say is adding a component of gratitude and mindfulness or being where your feet are. So focusing on the positive is you talk about it helps the snowball gain momentum, right? Like we're often too cynical, too negative, too entitled, all of those kinds of things. And that gets in the way of our productivity and it gets in the way of us being able to decrease stress in our lives. And so adding kind of the icing on the cake of using gratitude and presence, being where our feet are in the moment, not trying to multitask, all of those kinds of things can be a really powerful way to keep the momentum of a chronic stress management routine going, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, good morning, Donnie. I saw
Donnie.
Yeah.
Donnie taught with us the other day. It was awesome.
Yay. I'm so excited. Can't wait. I've not met Donnie yet, so I can't wait.
Yes, he's fantastic. Great guy.
Yeah, so I think I think that idea, and I want to give this as an example. I've been doing some gratitude stuff with my husband, and my husband tends to be like yeah, all right, like
it's real Pollyannish, that gratitude thing. Yeah.
And I said, well, let's just try it, and I really want to start it with the kids, and so he kind of jumped on board with me. I think more to appease me than really thinking that.
Sure. Same with mine.
And I'm, like probably 4 or 5 days into it, we do it every morning with each other now. And 4 or 5 days in, he's like, this gratitude stuff really works.
I'm telling you, it does. And we always tell our first responder agencies and military agencies that we work with, we have a ton of respect for the stuff that they face. And it's real, I mean, they work with people in their worst moments. And so we would never recommend something that, one, is not well researched in that area, but two, that we don't think really works, and you stand in front of a room full of firefighters and tell them to be grateful, right? Like you have to really convince them of it. And the convincing comes from them practicing it and living it. And then they start to see the switch. And it really is, there's a lot of research behind it, but there's a humbling quality to gratitude. You can't be grateful unless you are first humble. And so gratitude counters cynicism, and it counters entitlement, and it counters ego, right? And in any environment in the world right now, we've got a lot of that, right? And so
think about what we're talking with the chronic stress. So what happens when we have a ton of stress? We get cynical, we have our ego, and those are the things that get in our way. And so being able to use something, being very intentional about it, I think can really help put some of that into perspective. So.
Yeah. And physiologically, when we encounter that stress, it kind of shuts off the human part of our brain, whether it's daily stress or trauma on a more severe scale. It has the same effect, right? And it kind of shuts off the human part of your brain. Gratitude and functional MRI has been found to be one of the most powerful tools to turn that part of your brain back on. And so it's a direct counter to the stress that we face on a daily basis. So using that helps put you in a place where you can more effectively manage your chronic stress. So it's a buffer, it's a buffer against all of this stuff. So
yeah, I love that. I love what Sam said. He said, don't let your your gratitude, your gratitude.
I love it. We need to put that on the website.
I know, I like that. And I think that's so true. That goes back to when when our plate is full, when we're not managing our stress well, when we have 85 balls that we're juggling all at the same time, it's really hard to stop and appreciate some of those small things. And so when you take the opportunity to be more intentional about that, and you start to see the effect that has in your day-to-day and in mitigating some of that stress. Your stress, that's the thing. Stress is never going to go away, ever.
It's going to happen. Yeah.
It's going to be there. So just finding ways to have a process and how you deal with that, I think, is one of the best ways to combat that.
Yeah. And so if you can have a way of, we're never going to control our stress, but minimizing it as much as we can on a daily basis, and having a practice that engages that human part of our brain, puts us in a place where we're, in HeartMath, they would call it more coherent, but we're more focused, more inspired, more creative. Gratitude is a powerful tool for that. If you can do those two things, then when life does throw something at you, which it will, you're coming at it from a more focused and inspired place, which helps you to grow from that trauma on the other side instead of living in it for the rest of your life, right? And we're all going to get that too. We're all going to get those big things that are going to happen at some point, loss of a loved one or car accidents or whatever it is. And of course, in the first responder world, they're experiencing it much more often. We're all going to face those things. And so we need to be ready for them. We need to build our capacity by managing our daily stress and finding a way to inspire ourselves every day, right? Yeah. So we have the capacity for it.
I love that. And Donnie just said too that they've been doing a daily gratitude process in their house, and that it's changed the feel for it. And I love what he said. He focuses on 3 things every day that he's grateful for, and he posts them. So there's something to that, right? Like, it's not just that I'm grateful or that I'm recognizing that I'm grateful, but I'm thinking about I'm grateful. I'm identifying at least 3 very specific things, and then I'm sharing it, which there's a whole nother power in the process of sharing that and expressing that. So I think that's awesome.
Take someone with you when you do that. It's like you get yourself on a more positive, we call it a positive spiral, right? You get yourself on a more positive spiral. You bring somebody with you by sharing it.
Yeah.
Because they then begin to think what they're grateful for. We do this practice in rooms full of first responders and military personnel. And I'm telling you, it changes the dynamic of the entire room. It's a really powerful thing. So
it's so awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just recap really quick, and then we'll be done for today. So we're talking about this concept of chronic stress, which is your day-to-day stuff, and how do you start to get a handle on that? And so my takeaways and Add to America are first to inventory. Okay, what is really the biggest maybe stressor in my life? Is it my finances? Is it my marriage? Is it my parenting? Is it my work? I don't know what that is for you, but identify what that is, and then come up with a plan for it. So how am I going to start to address even one small part or aspect of that?
Yeah, and stay small. Don't overdo it.
Stay small. So start to develop some kind of habit that begins to take that off your plate or alleviate some of that stress. Once you get that and you feel good about it and you're into kind of that routine, then you take the next part of, okay, what's another stressor that I have? How can I start to address that? Let me get that ball back up in the air,
Yeah.
And then of course, practicing some mindfulness and gratitude along the way, and doing that very intentionally and again daily, I think would be awesome.
Yeah. Final thing to add to that, if you know what your why is in life, if you know what you're working towards, if you know what your purpose is, then you can start managing this chronic stress in a way that guides you towards that why, right? Whatever it is you're working towards, and it doesn't have to be profound, but whatever you want to get out of life, if you have an end goal in sight with that, and that's professional goals or personal goals, if your why is to live on a beach in retirement with your spouse, then start managing that chronic stress in a way that gets you a little bit closer to that goal every day. because that's what inspires you to keep going with it, right?
Yeah, I love that. All right. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I think that was good conversation.
Okay. Well, thank you again for an amazing conversation, and we will be back. I think we'll be back next week, which I'm excited.
We're not teaching next Friday, so we should be back. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And I love your bangs.
Oh.
A new hairdo. I love it. It's beautiful.
Summer do. All right.